If God wanted to be known, truly known in a way that left no room for doubt, wouldn't it be obvious? Wouldn't every sunrise, every storm, every glance toward the sky carry the same unmistakable message? Wouldn't faith be effortless, unshakable like breathing? And yet, here we are. People whisper about silence. They argue about absence. They search libraries, scroll feeds, scroll endlessly, hoping that somewhere, some hidden corner of history, some pattern in stars or numbers might reveal a sign, a hint, a clue. But the signs are never enough. Not complete, not certain, never satisfying. Why does faith in a world built on clarity feel fragile? Why does the heart ache for something it cannot name? And why, when the soul reaches, stretched thin and raw, is the answer always missing? Some say it's a test. Some say it's a mystery beyond human comprehension. Some say God hides because he must, but hides from whom? From humanity as a whole, or from each individual in the small, quiet spaces where only the heart listens? Perhaps it is not hiding at all. Perhaps it is something else, a challenge, a nudge, a presence disguised as absence. Or maybe it is neither of these. Maybe it is simply silence, and silence by its very nature refuses to be explained. And then comes the fear, the subtle, creeping fear that the absence is permanent, that the questions themselves might be unanswerable, that the longing we feel is designed to remain unfulfilled. And in that fear, we circle the same questions again and again. Why does suffering exist? Why does love falter? Why does the good sometimes vanish and the unworthy endure? If certainty were placed before us, would we recognize it? Or would we dismiss it, like a tool we do not yet understand? And if God were to reveal himself completely, what would become of choice? What would become of freedom? And yet the heart still reaches, still whispers, still hopes. We look for signs in the quiet, in the storm, in the flicker of a candle. We read the lines of Scripture as if each word contains a secret message meant for us alone. We search in rituals, in prayers, in chants. We seek patterns in coincidence, in numbers, in the way leaves fall in autumn. And still the silence. A silence that is not empty, exactly. It is dense, heavy, weighty. It presses against the mind and the chest, demanding attention. It waits, and we wait with it. And maybe that is the point. Or maybe the point is another question we are not ready to ask. Maybe it is the longing itself, the seeking itself that forms the shape of faith, rather than the answer. And even as we speak it aloud, even as we whisper the word God, even as we stretch our hands upward in hope or despair, the silence remains. The question lingers. The distance remains. And so we circle. And so we wonder. We usually respond to this discomfort with ideas that sound complete from a distance. Free will. Choice. The necessity of faith. These explanations are repeated often, polished by time and tradition, yet they rarely settle the unease completely. They point towards something without ever arriving there. They explain just enough to keep the question alive. Then there is doubt, not the dramatic kind that announces itself loudly, but the quiet version that slips into ordinary moments. While driving alone, while lying awake at night, while watching the world move forward without instruction. This doubt doesn't accuse. It asks, not out of rebellion, but exhaustion. If God were undeniable, what would belief become? Would faith still exist, or would it be replaced by obligation? Would devotion survive certainty, or would it collapse into routine? Maybe uncertainty is essential. Or maybe that's just another idea designed to make the silence easier to live with. Beneath all of this is a quieter fear that the silence may not be temporary, that it may not resolve, that the distance we feel is not a test but a condition. And that thought is unsettling enough that most people never let it finish forming. Instead of answers, what we receive is repetition. The same questions asked by different voices across different centuries, each convinced their moment might finally produce clarity. Yet nothing fully resolves. The language changes, the culture shifts, the technology advances, but the silence remains strangely consistent. It adapts, but it does not disappear. Maybe hiding is not about absence at all. Maybe it's about proximity that is just close enough to feel real, but far enough to remain uncertain. A presence that can be sensed but never confirmed, like hearing footsteps without seeing who walks behind you. Enough to provoke attention, not enough to end the search. People say that faith grows in darkness, that trust deepens without proof. But rarely do they talk about the cost of that darkness, the mental strain of waiting, the emotional fatigue of hoping, the quiet resentment that can form when prayers feel unanswered, when suffering feels excessive, when silence stretches longer than expected. And yet, despite all of this, people keep listening. They keep speaking into the quiet. They keep returning to the same question, reshaping it, softening it, sometimes disguising it as something else. Maybe that persistence means something. Or maybe it only proves how deeply humans fear the possibility that there is no response coming. The idea that God hides forces us to confront something uncomfortable. That certainty might not be the goal. That resolution might never arrive. That the question itself could be permanent, stitched into human consciousness like a reminder we were never meant to feel complete. And so the silence holds. Not broken, not explained, just present enough to be noticed, distant enough to be doubted. And the wondering continues, not because it is satisfying, but because stopping would feel like surrender. There is a particular discomfort with uncertainty that feels uniquely American, a cultural impatience with unanswered questions. From an early age, we are taught that problems exist to be solved, that confusion is temporary, and that with enough effort, clarity will eventually arrive. Every question should lead somewhere. Every mystery should close itself neatly. And yet, when it comes to God, that expectation quietly collapses. The same society that prides itself on innovation, precision, and results suddenly finds itself stalled, circling the same questions without progress. Why are we here? What is expected of us? Why does belief feel so uneven, so inconsistent, so dependent on circumstance? In America, faith is often packaged as certainty. Clear messages, clear rules, clear promises. Churches compete for attention. Sermons are shortened. Doubt is smoothed over. Silence is filled with music, slogans, reassurance. There is little room to sit with not knowing. Discomfort is treated as failure, not as part of the process. But beneath the surface, the questions persist. They don't disappear just because answers are repeated loudly enough. They wait. They surface late at night, after the noise fades, after confidence wears thin. And when they do, the familiar formulas feel less convincing. The need for answers isn't just spiritual, it's cultural. A belief that meaning should be efficient, that truth should be accessible, that if God exists, he should communicate clearly, consistently, and on schedule. And when he doesn't, frustration grows. Not always toward God, but toward the silence itself. This is why ambiguity feels threatening. It interrupts the narrative of progress. It suggests limits. It reminds us that not everything bends to explanation or effort. In a culture built on solutions, mystery feels like weakness, like something unfinished, like a flaw that needs correction. So explanations multiply. Psychological ones, historical ones, Scientific ones, spiritual ones. Each offers partial comfort, but none fully satisfy. They overlap, contradict, and sometimes cancel each other out. The result is not clarity, but noise. Layers of interpretation stacked so thick that the original question becomes harder to hear. Faith in this environment often becomes transactional. Believe correctly, behave correctly, and clarity will follow. But when clarity doesn't come, the sense of failure is internalized. Maybe belief wasn't strong enough. Maybe doubt slipped in unnoticed. Maybe something was done wrong. Yet the silence persists regardless of effort, regardless of sincerity, regardless of desire. What if the problem isn't a lack of answers, but an expectation that answers should arrive in a form we recognize? What if the American desire for certainty has shaped how God is imagined, and how his silence is misunderstood? These questions linger uncomfortably because they challenge more than belief. They challenge identity. There's something revealing about how quickly silence is filled, with commentary, with distractions, with explanations meant to settle the unease before it becomes too sharp. Silence creates space, and space invites questions. Questions invite vulnerability. And vulnerability is something this culture rarely encourages. Yet silence remains one of the few places where belief is tested honestly. Not publicly, not performatively, but privately, where no one is watching and reassurance is unavailable. In those moments, faith is no longer about presentation. It becomes about endurance. The American need for answers isn't wrong, it's human. But it may also be part of the tension. The insistence that meaning must reveal itself clearly may be precisely what makes silence feel unbearable. Perhaps the question isn't why God stays quiet, but why we struggle so deeply when he does. What it exposes, what it removes, what it refuses to protect us from. And so the search continues. Not because it's comfortable, but because stopping would mean accepting uncertainty without resolution. And that may be the one answer this culture is least prepared to face. Silence has a way of changing shape depending on how long it lasts. At first it feels temporary, almost gentle. A pause. A breath. Something that will soon be filled. But as time passes, silence becomes heavier. It stretches, it presses. It begins to demand interpretation, and that is when it becomes uncomfortable. Many describe God's silence as a test, but rarely explain what is being tested. Patience, perhaps. Trust. Endurance. Or maybe something less obvious. Silence removes guidance. It strips away reassurance. It leaves individuals alone with their assumptions, their fears, and their expectations. Without feedback, belief is forced to stand on its own. At first, people respond with effort. More prayer, more reflection, more searching. Silence is treated as a signal to try harder. But when effort produces no response, something shifts. Doubt doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives gradually, disguised as curiosity, then fatigue. If silence is a test, it is not one with clear instructions. There are no rules, no timelines, no visible markers of progress, only the persistent absence of response. And in that absence, people begin to question not just God, but themselves. What is being missed? What is being done wrong? The longer the silence lasts, the more personal it becomes. There is something unsettling about unanswered effort, about speaking into space and hearing nothing return. Over time, silence begins to feel less like a pause and more like a presence, an active force that shapes thought, emotion, and belief. It invites interpretation whether one wants to interpret it or not. Some conclude that silence strengthens faith, forcing belief to exist without reward. Others feel that erodes faith, slowly wearing it down until certainty becomes impossible. Both experiences exist simultaneously, often within the same person. Silence does not choose a single outcome. It exposes whatever already exists beneath the surface. If God speaks through silence, the message is ambiguous at best. It can be read as discipline, indifference, or invitation. The problem is not that silence lacks meaning, but that it contains too many possibilities, and humans are not comfortable holding multiple interpretations at once. This is where frustration emerges. Not loud, not angry, but quiet and persistent. A sense that the test itself is unclear, that the purpose is hidden, that endurance is being demanded without explanation. And still, nothing interrupts the quiet. What makes silence so difficult is that it refuses to end cleanly. There's no final moment where its purpose is revealed. No confirmation that it was endured correctly. No reassurance that it mattered. Silence simply continues until something inside the person shifts or breaks. Some learn to live with it. They adapt. They lower expectations. They reinterpret faith as something less responsive, more internal. Others drift away, not in anger, but in resignation. They stop asking, they stop listening. Not because they stopped caring, but because caring became too exhausting. If silence is a test, it may not be designed to be passed. It may not have a conclusion. It may exist to reveal limits. How long belief can survive without reinforcement. How much uncertainty the human mind can tolerate before it demands resolution. And perhaps that is the point that is hardest to accept. That silence does not guarantee growth. That it does not promise reward. That it simply exists, unchanged by effort or sincerity. The question then becomes unavoidable. If silence is a test, what happens to those who fail? Or worse, what happens if there was never a finish line at all? It's easy to assume that the greatest problem is not knowing. That if answers finally arrived, clear, undeniable, complete, everything would settle into place. But beneath the desire for certainty, there is another emotion that rarely gets acknowledged. Fear. Not fear of silence, but fear of what an answer might require. An answer would impose meaning, and meaning carries weight. It would define responsibility. It would clarify expectations. It would remove the freedom to interpret life on personal terms. Certainty sounds comforting, but it also narrows possibility. It replaces choice with obligation. If God spoke clearly without ambiguity, there would be no room to negotiate belief, no space to delay commitment, no ability to drift in and out of faith depending on circumstance. The silence, uncomfortable as it is, leaves room to breathe. It allows belief to remain flexible, undefined, survivable. Perhaps part of the tension comes from recognizing this quietly, that we ask for answers while simultaneously fearing their arrival, that we want guidance without constraint, meaning without cost. And so silence becomes tolerable, not because it is satisfying, but because it postpones accountability. It allows the question to exist without demanding a response.
Answers have consequences. They force alignment. They remove excuses. They demand change. This is rarely stated openly, but it shapes the way belief is approached. Silence preserves ambiguity, and ambiguity preserves comfort. There is also the fear of disappointment. What if the answer doesn't match expectation? What if clarity brings something smaller, harsher, or less reassuring than imagined? Silence allows idealization. It keeps hope abstract, untested, intact. In this way, not knowing becomes safer than knowing. It protects against disillusionment. It prevents the collapse of carefully constructed beliefs. It allows people to project meaning rather than confront it. Faith, under these conditions, becomes less about truth and more about maintenance. About sustaining a version of belief that doesn't disrupt life too deeply. Silence supports this equilibrium. It doesn't challenge. It doesn't confront. It simply remains. But this safety comes at a cost. The longer silence is accepted, the more difficult it becomes to imagine certainty. The question shifts from why God doesn't speak to whether we are prepared to listen. The fear of the answer may explain why the silence feels both frustrating and protective. It unsettles, yet it shields. It creates longing, yet prevents resolution. This contradiction is rarely acknowledged, but it quietly governs the relationship between belief and doubt. If an answer arrived, it would close the question, and closing the question would change everything. Life would no longer be open-ended. Suffering would demand explanation. Choices would carry cosmic significance. Perhaps silence persists not because God is absent, but because certainty would be unbearable. Or perhaps that thought is simply another way to rationalize the distance. Another attempt to make peace with not knowing. What remains is the unresolved tension, the sense that something is withheld, not out of neglect, but necessity. Whether that necessity belongs to God or to humanity is unclear. And so the silence continues, not as a void, but as a boundary. One that protects as much as it frustrates. One that keeps the question alive without ever answering it. Never before has humanity had access to so much information. Explanations are everywhere. Data fills every available space. Questions that once lingered for generations are now answered in seconds. And yet, despite this abundance, something feels unresolved. The deeper questions remain untouched, circling beneath the surface of constant explanation. Science explains how things work, but rarely why they matter. It describes processes, mechanisms, outcomes. It maps reality with remarkable precision, but meaning slips through the cracks. The more detailed the explanations become, the easier it is to confuse understanding with purpose. In this environment, silence becomes difficult to tolerate. Every pause is filled. Every moment of uncertainty is interrupted. Noise replaces reflection. Screens replace stillness. Distraction becomes a habit, then a necessity. The absence of God's voice becomes easier to ignore when something else is always speaking. Notifications, updates, content, commentary. None of it answers the deeper question, but it keeps the question from being asked too directly. And so the silence doesn't disappear, it's buried, covered over by constant stimulation, hidden beneath layers of activity. Distraction offers relief. It softens discomfort. It postpones reflection, but it also prevents resolution. The questions remain unanswered not because they lack depth, but because they are rarely allowed space to fully form. Science and technology provide structure, but they also create an illusion of control, that everything can be measured, predicted, optimized, that uncertainty is temporary, that mystery is a problem waiting to be solved. But existential questions resist this framework. They don't respond to efficiency. They don't resolve through accumulation of data. The more they are approached as technical problems, the further they retreat. This creates a subtle tension. Faith becomes unnecessary in a world that appears self-explanatory. At the same time, meaning feels increasingly fragile. The result is not disbelief, but numbness. A quiet detachment from questions that once felt urgent. Noise fills the space where reflection might occur, not because answers are found, but because the search has become exhausting. There is a difference between explanation and understanding, and it's in that difference where the silence lingers. Science can describe the universe, but it cannot tell us why we feel unsettled within it. Technology can connect us instantly, yet leave us internally disconnected. The more noise there is, the harder it becomes to notice what's missing. Silence doesn't compete well with stimulation. It doesn't demand attention. It waits quietly, unnoticed, until something forces stillness. When distraction fades, late at night, in moments of loss, in unexpected pauses, the old questions return, unchanged, unresolved, patient. Perhaps silence survives not in opposition to knowledge, but alongside it. Not as ignorance, but as something knowledge cannot replace. Something that resists explanation. And so the noise continues. Not because it answers anything, but because it delays the confrontation with questions that have no clear resolution. Questions that remain, waiting beneath the surface, unchanged by progress. Every story is expected to end somewhere. A conclusion, a resolution, a moment where questions settle and meaning becomes clear. But some questions resist endings. They stretch across generations, reappearing in different forms, spoken in different voices, yet never fully answered. The question of God's silence is one of these. It doesn't belong to a single era or culture. It has followed humanity through centuries of belief, doubt, devotion, and loss. Every generation assumes it might finally resolve what came before. And every generation leaves the question unfinished. Perhaps this is because the question was never meant to close. Perhaps it exists to remain open, to shape how people live rather than what they conclude. Silence doesn't guide toward an answer, it guides toward reflection. And reflection, unlike certainty, does not arrive all at once. It unfolds slowly, unevenly, often without reassurance. It changes shape depending on experience, loss, and time. The absence of resolution becomes its own presence. There is something unsettling about an unfinished question. It denies closure. It refuses to comfort. It lingers long after attention has moved elsewhere. And yet, it also creates space. Space for humility, for curiosity, for doubt that doesn't demand immediate correction. A final answer would bring relief, but it would also bring limitation. It would define belief too narrowly, confining it to a conclusion rather than a process. Silence, by contrast, keeps belief fluid, unstable, alive. This may explain why the search continues even when hope fades. Why people return to the question not expecting answers, but unable to let it go. Silence doesn't resolve meaning, but it preserves the need for it. The discomfort remains, not as punishment, but as condition. A reminder that understanding has limits, that certainty may not be the highest goal. And so the question endures, not because it is unanswered, but because it refuses to end. In the end, there is no conclusion waiting, no final explanation to gather everything neatly together. Only the continuation of the question, passed quietly from one person to the next. Perhaps that is what makes it human. The need to ask, the willingness to wonder, the endurance to live without resolution. Silence remains, not empty, not meaningless, but incomplete. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't defend itself. It simply exists, inviting interpretation without offering confirmation. And maybe that is where this story must stop, not with an answer, but with an open space, a pause, a moment where nothing is resolved, and yet everything feels heavy with possibility. The question lingers, the silence holds, and the wondering continues. Reality is bigger than what we can see. Its patterns, its silences, its hidden questions. Some remain invisible until we pause, observe, and explore. When you choose to subscribe, it's not just a click. It's a commitment to keep wondering, to look deeper, to allow your understanding to stretch beyond the obvious. Every video here is a doorway, a small invitation to see the world differently, to question what feels permanent, to explore truths that linger just beyond perception. Subscribe and step further into the questions, not to find simple answers, but to expand your knowledge of the reality that surrounds and contains you. Because the more we see, the more we realize how much remains unseen. And that is where the journey truly begins.